Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really pleased to have been invited along this afternoon to talk to you about resilience and work-life balance in the new normal, whatever that might mean, because I think as soon as we get used to a new normal, it's gone before we know it, unfortunately. But that's the context we'll deal with, because that's the reality that our lives are living with at the moment. So I really hope that this afternoon you will get something out of this session that will help you in some way. And there are loads of hints and tips, lots of practical things to help you moving forward. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to think about your own well-being. I'm not going to ask anybody to feedback on numbers or anything, but when we talk about well-being, my business is Wellbeing Training Solutions, which I've been running for about 4 years, having had a background in business education and in public health. And it seemed to me that there was one thing lacking in most people's lives, and that was the appropriate coping strategies. We spend so much time in schools teaching people all sorts of things, but we don't teach them ways to actually manage themselves better. So that was where Wellbeing Training Solutions came from. But wellbeing is a misunderstood term, and it's a market that's been overwhelmed with things that really aren't that relevant a lot of the time. So I want to make one thing clear. We all have some level of health or well-being all the time. Everybody has some level of mental health or mental well-being all the time. Mental illness is something different. So mental illness is a diagnosed condition. If we're thinking about things like depression, you would normally expect to be feeling mentally unwell for a couple of weeks and then go and see your GP to see whether there is a problem. And I would encourage anybody who is feeling a real low ebb to do that, to go and speak to somebody. Because today what we're focusing on is the health and well-being rather than the illness. So it's the stuff that will make you feel better. And even people who have mental illness can do this stuff to make themselves feel better. So well-being is different to happiness. Happiness can be quite fleeting, quite momentary. You can feel great 1 minute and then still drop down to feeling pretty rough after that. But when I'm talking about well-being, I'm saying let's think about, say, the last week or so. And if you had to score yourself on a scale of 0 out of 10, where 0 was you were feeling as terrible as you could possibly imagine that you could feel, and 10 was you feeling absolutely on top of the world, what number would you attribute to your well-being in the current week or so that you've been living through? And again, I'm not going to ask you to feedback on it, but it's really good practice to check in rather than living on autopilot. So now you've hopefully given yourself a number, and it might have surprised you, either for good or for bad. But the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is freeze exactly where you are. Do not move a muscle. And as you do that, I want you to just take a body scan. So from the very top of your head, come down through your face and all the way through your body. We'll run through it and find out where you're holding any tensions or any stresses. So for me personally, it's always in my jaw. I have a clenched jaw. I feel my teeth start to ache. Then I get the tension headaches, shoulders up round the ears. So don't move anything, but just run through your body, run through your head. Can you feel the tension or maybe pain that you've kind of ignored down through your neck, through your shoulders and into your arms, down your torso, down through your legs, and finishing up at your feet where you might find you've got toes clenched or sitting in an awkward position. And once you've registered that, it's helpful to do that periodically to make sure that your body isn't contributing to any ill feeling that you've got. So the next thing I'm going to ask you to do, and you're hopefully in the privacy of your own home or a nice quiet office, is just take one really nice deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth and adjust yourself. Adjust your positioning to something that is more positive and more productive for you. And my other top tip with this is actually to do this and to think about how your physiology affects your psychology is really powerful. So the next time you're on a phone call that is making you lose the will to live and you desperately need to get that person off the phone, and it might be the same caller all the time or different callers, change your position. If you're slumped over your computer while you're taking that call, you're not going to move that call forward. Stand up. Stand in an assertive position and you will make a big change. Your physiology affects your psychology. So that's your first tip for the day. Make sure that you keep coming back to check how you're doing. And then I want to think about our context. So our context at the moment is, if we think back to this time last year or January or February this year, we were all encountering everyday stresses. That's life. We go through peaks and troughs, and life is generally pretty tricky. You know, hopefully we have lots of good days, but we also have lots of balls in the air lots of the time. Work is difficult, home is difficult, and then we're always juggling but managing those things. But we went from that to a situation where it was literally everyone, everywhere, everything affected overnight, and affected to an extent that I don't think any of us had ever anticipated. A, that we would have to deal with, or B, that we could probably cope with in the ways that we have. And then further changes came, and those tensions, led to tensions which arose from a less of collective solidarity. So in lockdown, we were all in the same boat and we knew we were all doing difficult stuff. Now we've got different areas of the country in a different situation. We've got some people furloughed, some not. The people furloughed may be thinking, well, why was I chosen to be furloughed? The people working thinking, why was I not chosen to work? It's really difficult, and that has caused that loss of collective solidarity, which destabilises people. But what is really good to get a grip on is that uncertainty is something humans struggle with. So if you've struggled with all of that, that's entirely natural. In fact, research that's been done shows us very clearly that even people with diagnoses of terrible illnesses are much better off once they've had a diagnosis than while they're dealing with the uncertainty, because the uncertainty is the thing that as humans we struggle with. So this pandemic has put us all into a real state of uncertainty. That has then led to us having to make lots of change or adaptation. And then we stabilise for a little while, and then it starts all over again because the next wave of changes hits us. Now, that might be from the government, or it might be from your workplace, or it might be about the kids having been at home and then gone back to school. But we're going to go through this process of uncertainty, adaptation, stabilisation, I think, for some time to come. So to acknowledge it and realise that it's human to find that difficult is a good starting point. And then work and home have collided. And for the primary caregivers in the home, for the people who carry the cognitive burden of organising everybody, which generally it's accepted that that is often the woman in the house, but it's not always. For that individual, it's particularly difficult because they're now dealing with, when I use the word collide, it's very deliberately. I do mean that they have literally come and created a mess that we've got to work ourselves around. So it's no wonder if people are struggling. And we're also now suffering from a real cognitive overload. We have a finite resource in our brains. We cannot do everything. And we're used to working on autopilot a lot of the time. If you think about when you started driving and how you had to start thinking really, really carefully, mirror, signal, maneuver, and now you do all those things without even thinking about it. That's how our lives have changed. We've gone from a situation of being able to automatically wander into a shop, buy what we need and walk out, to now have to be really cognizant that we are needing to bring our mask and that we must keep our distance and that we shouldn't touch things or put them back. So now all those everyday stresses that it talks about at the top of the slide have been added to by this cognitive overload from constant change. So if you're struggling, just accept that that is what it is to be human, and it won't last forever. Ultimately, give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to feel those awkward feelings, to know that you are completely normal if it's a bit of a struggle, and actually give yourself permission to have a pat on the back if you're coping with it much better than you thought you might. So what is resilience then? Because that's what we're talking about, is resilience and work-life balance. Well, the American Psychological Association, they term resilience as the process of adapting, and we've just talked about the fact that we're constantly adapting now, the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, yes, possibly trauma, tragedy, definitely threats and significant sources of stress. I think we can relate to all of those things at the moment, such as family and relationship problems, serious health problems, or workplace and financial stresses. And we will all be experiencing some of those to some extent or another. They say that resilience means bouncing back from difficult experiences. But I'm inclined to disagree that it's about bouncing back. There's an author called Meg Jay who said that resilience is much more of a battle than a bounce, and I'm much more inclined to agree with her. Bouncing back makes it sound like oldies like me will remember the weebles that wobble but they don't fall down. It sounds like it's that. We take a knot, we go over, we bounce right back. It's just not that easy for most of us, actually. We have to really work at being resilient, and working at it makes us better at it. But if you don't bounce back from everything really easily, don't be too hard on yourself about that. Again, unless you've had the experience of having some challenges, then you won't know how well you can do. But the really positive thing is that the research that has been done through the first stages of the coronavirus pandemic show that we as a human race are actually recovering from the traumas of the pandemic while the pandemic is still happening. Often we think we have to wait for it to be over and then we get better. We are recovering already, so that's really positive stuff. So now we've talked about what resilience is, how can you help with your own resilience? And this model comes from Stephen Covey, who wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's a great book. It's quite an old book now and it's been adjusted over time, but I think it's a terrific book to give you some idea of where your control is and where your energy is best invested. So if we look at this diagram, we've got in the center our inner circle, which is our circle of control. And I want you to think about that as really a very small circle of control. If you think about your life and your work and what you can actually control, it's not very much. It's pretty much limited to this vessel that is our bodies, our minds, our reactions and our actions. So all we're really in control of is ourselves. Then we've got families and friends and colleagues and work environments where we actually have the ability to influence people, which is our second circle. And we can influence them by our behaviours and how we speak to people and what we do. But we can't actually make somebody do something in that circle of influence. We can only try and influence them towards our desired outcome. And the final and the outside circle is our circle of concern, or I prefer to call it actually my circle of acceptance. Because in that circle of concern is all the other stuff that we can do nothing about. It's the fact that we are in the middle of a global pandemic. It's the fact that there are so many things that we have no control over whatsoever. So in terms of where is our energy best invested, it's really best invested within our circle of control. So what we do and how we react to situations. It's also well invested in how we influence other people. So again, if we look globally, we can influence things like whether we sign a petition or how we vote and how we talk to other people. But there are no guaranteed outcomes. And essentially that circle of concern, or your circle, as I call it, of acceptance, is really a total waste of your time and energy. Any time and energy you spend worrying about what's in that circle or trying to control what's in that circle is dead time, wasted time. It gets you nowhere. And as we go through the presentation, I hope you'll think about that and think about where you can really help to empower yourself by taking back control and influence and letting go of the concerns. And I've got a little diagram here for you about how our thoughts, our feelings and our behaviours interact. And they do interact a huge amount. So I want to give you an example about something that many of you might have experienced, particularly during full lockdown, which was when we were really feeling very overwhelmed, a lot of us, maybe very low, maybe frustrated, confused. And a really simple action that an awful lot of people have expressed that they went to when feeling like that was wandering up to the fridge or the cupboard and taking out the first thing that fell in front of them. So I think people had lots of experiences of chocolate just falling into their mouth. And that is not unusual, because when you're feeling low, that can lead you to behave in ways that aren't helpful. And the result of that is that you then think afterwards, why on earth did I do that? It didn't make me feel any better apart from in that real quick moment. And so then you think, what an idiot, why did I do that? And then you feel bad about yourself, and it can lead to this downward spiral. So feelings are an invaluable reaction to events. If we think about the pandemic, for example, most of us had a feeling or lots of feelings about the events that were going on around us. So there are some reactions to external events, and then there are some reactions to internal events. So it might be that perhaps it evoked from you a memory, and that you had reactions because of that memory. Our feelings really heavily influence our thinking and our behaviour. So if we can understand our feelings a bit better, we can definitely influence our thoughts and our behaviours a little bit better as well. And if we intervene and go from reacting to feelings to responding to feelings, again, it puts us in a position of power. So it might be relationships with family where you're all cooped up together and all of a sudden things get really tricky. You feel frustrated, you blow up, and then afterwards you feel bad and you think, I shouldn't have done it. That can make you then feel bad, and so the situation goes on. But if instead of reacting to your feelings, you really stop and think about what am I feeling and why am I feeling it, and then you let your thinking brain come in, and that thinking brain takes over and says, okay, it's not actually what they've done, which would be my reaction to that is the problem. It's the fact that I'm feeling low already that's the problem. So let me respond to this in a more thoughtful manner. And all of a sudden you can go from a downward spiral to a much more conscious, thought out and positive response, where actually your thoughts, behaviours and feelings bring you right up. And that might be something like as simple as, I feel really low, I'm going to go and put on a playlist that is full of absolutely banging positive music for me. Whatever works for you, but just make sure you're aware of how your thoughts, your feelings and your behaviours are interacting at all times. And remember, I'm really big on remembering that you are only human. And I've put only in inverted commas because being human is actually a fantastic thing. You are designed to worry. The human race would not have survived were we not designed to react to the threat over our shoulder. Had we not been designed to respond to a loud bang or the fact that there's a predator behind us, we would be extinct by now. So worry is our default status. But years ago, that status was built around the fact that things would happen, big things would happen that would cause us stress. We would respond to that stress and then we'd go back to a normal kind of life for a little while. Whereas unfortunately now many of us, particularly at the current time, are living with a very much drip drip effect. And that drip drip effect is not what we're designed for. But a thing that can help you through that is to have a growth mindset. And it is a massive resource, but it all starts with your thinking. So you've got two options there. Is your mindset, I am what I am and I can't change that really, you know, old dogs, new tricks, those kind of things? Or is it much more a mindset of, I can change things about the kind of person I am. I'm not set, I'm not fixed. And once you've had a thought about where you sit, it's probably self-evident, but in case it's not, I will explain that one view is a real barrier to adaptation and the other one is a real enabler. So if you just think I am what I am, I can't change that, you will be inclined to think you can't cope with things as well as somebody who believes that they can constantly change things about themselves. So again, if I ask you to think back to a year ago, had somebody said that you were going to be confronted with the year ahead that you've had, I suspect you will identify that there are lots of things that you've changed and adapted to, but maybe you just haven't given yourself recognition for it. So if you are the sort of person with a fixed mindset, I am what I am and I can't change, be really, really honest with yourself and think about how much you have adapted. I'm doing a talk for a school tomorrow and I'll be telling those sixth formers that when they go into their working lives, most of the jobs they will end up doing don't actually exist yet. So adaptation for them is going to be key. And for me, I know I've got another 20 odd years of working life yet. So I better get adaptive because if I'm not, I'll get left behind. So try and remember that a growth mindset is the true mindset. A fixed mindset is actually not a reality. And ultimately, you can't build resilience without challenge. Anyone who thinks they're resilient but has never had any challenge in their life, they just don't know whether they're resilient yet. I'm not a believer of the everything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I actually think that's an absolute nonsense. But I do think that sometimes we need to challenge ourselves to know what we are capable of. That's what resilience is like. It's like a bicep. If you work that bicep, it will get stronger. And also you'll get that muscle memory about how to deal with things. So resilience gets stronger the more you challenge yourself. Very quickly, if your well-being feels like it's suffering, there are 6 ways to well-being. Again, all of the stuff I talk about is evidence-based. This is not floaty skirt wearing, incense burning nonsense. This is evidence-based stuff where there is evidence to back it up. And 6 ways to well-being, I'm going to concentrate on 5, which were the original 5, where we're saying that If you connect with people and you have really good relationships, that is probably the most important of the 5 of the 6 ways to well-being that we'll concentrate on. You need to work on your relationships. You need to foster positive relationships, because loneliness is becoming one of our biggest killers. So we need to make sure that instead of staring at our phone for hours a day, we're building those relationships. Being active, because being active is good for our bodies and therefore also has a knock-on effect in terms of the endorphins and the feel-good factor for our brains, really important. Keep learning. You can all tick that box today, because you will be learning something, whether from this presentation or the others. Keeping learning reminds you that actually growth is always possible. It's a really positive thing. Giving to others. It can be big stuff. It can be as small as a smile to a stranger on a walk in the park. And when you do good for others, you feel good about yourself, or certainly better about yourself. So that's another thing. When you can get a bit bogged down in it's all about me, which we do sometimes, think about other people also and what you can do for them. And the final one that I'm going to cover today is the be mindful. Mindfulness is a science all of itself, really, but it concentrates a lot on breath and making sure that you breathe well, and about when a feeling comes to you or a thought comes to you, to not be judgmental about that thought, to acknowledge it and then to let it go and move on, and try to live very much in the moment. You can Google it, you'll find much more about it. But if you find at any stage that your well-being is suffering, I really strongly encourage you to look up 6 ways to well-being or 5 ways to well-being and see if you're missing any of these elements in your life right now. So we're now going to take a gallop through stuff that is associated with your environment in terms of work-life balance and time use, because many of you, I understand, are working from home at least some of the time, if not all of the time. So the first thing I'd say is think about your diet, but I'm not talking really about food. I'm talking about your information diet. There's research that's been done that says that when a major trauma happens, say, for example, a terrorist incident, people who watch news on constant feed actually end up as damaged as those people who witnessed the incident, because over a prolonged period of time. So I think that the number was about 3 hours a day or more of those kind of constant news streams, which some people do, they'll have it on in the background, really affect how you feel. Avoid watching things that are going to stress you out before bedtime. So if you watching the news, for me personally, watching the news is a big one. It makes me anxious. So I will not watch the late night news. I'll watch it during the middle of the day, or I'll look at an app where I can control what I'm viewing. And you'll think about your information download. Think about not just what's on TV, but what you're looking at in your news feeds on social media. Make sure that you've got some rules around your working environment, whether that's at home or at work, and follow them and communicate those rules to other people so that they can follow them. Lots of us got really good at this at the beginning of lockdown, but we are beginning to ease off a little bit and we need to be better. Look at your routines. Are you waking and sleeping at the right times? Are you eating well? Are you exercising? And I'm not talking about going to the gym. I just mean moving your body, because some of the work I do is in public health, and a very popular phrase there now is sitting is the new smoking. So being really sedentary is really bad for us, and we need to just get up and move, even if it's just for a few minutes every hour, to stop ourselves getting into these ruts. Watch your caffeine and alcohol intake. The caffeine might affect your sleep. Lots of people during lockdown have said that they're drinking a lot more alcohol, and we come to believe that alcohol helps us sleep. It's an absolute myth. Alcohol helps us get to sleep, but it does not help us sleep. It helps us get to sleep very quickly, and then desperately affects the quality of our sleep. And it affects the way we are able to stay asleep, and also our sleep cycles. So avoid alcohol if you can. Give yourself permission for some time and space alone, even if that's just that you manage to get a bath once a week. Or if you're going to take an hour out in your room after the kids have gone to bed, and decide whether that downtime is for activity or for relaxation. But give yourself permission for it, rather than mindlessly watching another program that's not helping. Plan some socials with people that you want to spend your time with, even if you can't do it in the way you normally would. I've put a question mark next to set some goals, because actually some people are just coping with enough without more goals, but goals can be helpful for people. And when I talk about goals, it's because we have two types of well-being: the feel-good stuff, the meals, the time with friends, the nice things. But we also have something called eudaimonic well-being, which is our meaning and our purpose. And if we've started to lose meaning and purpose during all of this, it's a good time to come back to it and set ourselves some goals. Avoid the hamster wheel. And if you need to go and scream into a pillow to let it all out, you go ahead and do that, whatever works for you. So when you're building your balance in your working life relationships, again, balance is a subjective term because that suggests that things will be evenly scaled, and more often than not, they aren't. But there are some unintended and undesirable consequences from working from home more. Relationships with colleagues can suffer because you're not seeing them as much. So try and factor in catch-ups, whether that's online or in person. It might feel that your responsibility has increased or that your autonomy has decreased. And if that's the case, then speak to your line manager about it to try and make sure that the issues that are affecting you are being addressed and not left undealt with. The always-on culture is difficult when you're not in an office. That idea that, well, you're not here in the office, so I can ring you any old time, can come from customers, clients, and colleagues. So be clear, create the space, create the time, and create clarity about what's acceptable, because otherwise our boundaries blur. And when our boundaries blur, that's difficult. You need to make transitional gear changes to get you into your day and out of your day. The research that's been done suggests that a 14-minute commute was actually the ideal commute. So if any of you have that, consider yourselves lucky. That's the time it takes to get yourself out of home mode and into work mode. And of course, if you're working from home, you won't really have that at the moment. So instead, what you can do is to create that gear change for yourself. And that might be taking 15 minutes to sit and write down your plan for the day. It might be going for a walk for 15 minutes to get your head in that position. But those boundaries do blur if we don't make them very clear. There's also something called Parkinson's law, which suggests that our work expands or contracts to the amount of time that we've got for it. So monitor the quality of the time that you're spending on your work. And it may be that you kind of feel a bit guilty that you've got all this extra time now. So at the end of the day, rather than pack up at finishing time, you're sat slumped over your computer for another half an hour doing emails. Don't do it. It won't be at the right quality. And it might be that because you've got extra time at home, you're spending that time scrolling through your internet feeds. Again, don't do it. Make the time that you've got quality time. Then think about your day and how you're going to balance that day. Often what we're finding is that the urgent stuff gets done and the interruptions get done. And what I really mean by interruptions a lot of the time is emails. Because when we're emailing people back, we feel like, well, I'm providing real proof that I'm here and I'm doing stuff. But actually, the important stuff, which is often the development stuff, gets left. So try and build that back into your day. Make a block in your diary that says, this is for my development stuff. And then I'm going to run through rapid fire my top tips for building your resilience, some of which we've covered. So do that check-in. How are you doing on a scale of 0 to 10? Look at your breath and feel your body and adjust yourself to something more positive. Be gentle with yourself. If you're struggling, that is okay. Go through some battle to help yourself bounce with resilience. Understand that you will have to challenge a little bit to get there. Focus on what you can control and what you can influence, and don't waste energy on the stuff that's in your circle of concern. Feel what you're feeling, really feel it, and then you can respond to it rather than instead trying to, or inevitably reacting. And then think about your environment, your time, and the structures you're putting in place. And then this is my last slide that I'm going to share with you, is about some other top tips for building resilience and for building well-being. So the first one is to do a gratitude journal. That very simply means at the end of every day, write down 3 things that you're really grateful for that day. Because what happens sometimes is when we're overwhelmed, we only notice the bad stuff. The research is very clear. If we make a concerted effort to find the good stuff and acknowledge it, it gives us a much better sense of well-being, even if our worries are big ones. So pick those 3 things, be really specific about them. And if you struggle with that, try and imagine what things you would miss tomorrow if they weren't here that you might have taken for granted today. Think about your self-talk. Are you saying things to yourself like, I always do that, or I never do that? If you are, it's quite likely that your self-talk is not realistic. Always and never talk suggests that you're probably being too hard on yourself, or maybe too hard on other people. And put your thoughts on trial. Try to remove your thoughts from your context and say, if I were an outsider looking at this, is that also how I'd feel? Reframe things if you can. This is not about fooling yourself. This is not about being part of the positivity brigade where you pretend everything's great when it's not. But lockdown's a great example of this. People who had that feeling that I'm locked up indoors and I can't go anywhere, this is terrible. A real quick and easy reframe on that is, thank goodness I'm safe inside and I'm not having to go out and put myself at risk. It's the same situation, but just viewed in a different way, a different lens, a different perspective. Give yourself a worry window for 10 or 15 minutes every day. If you're a worrier, I am a worrier. Give yourself a worry window to jot down all the things that are worrying you, but that you can't control or influence, and then move on. If some of those things are things that are due to happen imminently, it's really interesting in a week's time to look back at the worry window you recorded and discover whether your worries were actually legitimate or whether perhaps they were a waste of your time and energy. Recognise your achievements. And those achievements might be very different now than they would have been a year ago. So when you're recognising your achievements, you might feel I'm doing way less now than I was this time last year or in January. But recognise your achievements using now's currency, because the fact is you can't judge apples with pears. You can't judge this week with the same week last year. So if you've had any achievements today and those achievements were a struggle, they're still an achievement. Recognise that, appreciate it, and you can build on it then, rather than that negative self-talk about I'm nowhere near as good as I was when the world was a different place. Be present. Try and focus on the moment. That doesn't mean don't plan. It doesn't mean don't think about the future, but it means about, again, investing your energy where it's well spent. And the only moment you actually have is the one we are right in right now. Yesterday is gone. You can't change it. Tomorrow isn't here yet and it's not promised. So let's just go with what we have right now. Acknowledge that all feelings are temporary. So even if your circumstances aren't going to change, your feelings about those circumstances will change. If you're in a really low ebb right now, that won't last forever. If you've ever been through a low ebb before and you got through it, you know it won't last forever. So when you acknowledge that your feelings are temporary, even if your circumstances aren't, it really helps you to move forward and to deal with life using my last bullet point, realistic optimism. We often think of ourselves as optimists, realists, or pessimists. There is something in there that's been lost, and that's realistic optimism. So if you look at your life in general, for the vast majority of us, even people who have suffered real traumas, we will look back at our life and say, actually, there are far more things in my life that are good that I didn't earn than things that are bad that I didn't earn. So when you take that knowledge and you actually really assess it, optimism is the realistic option. It's the true option to go with. And when you are realistically optimistic, it doesn't mean you're just hoping everything will turn out right. It means that you're using the evidence from the past to confirm for you that things will turn out right. And that is the end of my presentation. And I really hope that that has been helpful for you. Thank you very much.
Hi, Helen. Hello. Oh,
hello.
That was incredible. I don't think you can actually see the chat while you're presenting. I don't know if you actually want to stop your screen sharing and come back on to the
yeah.
But the chat is amazing. Sue Simmons, Helen, this was an excellent presentation. Thank you. Add this to your positive achievements today.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
I know myself and everyone in the chat is saying, wow, look, all that feedback. Thank you so much. Helen, I've got a couple of questions, a couple that have been sent to me anonymously, if you don't mind me asking.
Of course.
So the first one is, how can we get our counsellors to treat wellbeing more seriously? Is there anything we can do? Any kind of tips or advice from yourself?
Yes, I think the first thing is there is a Healthy Workplaces initiative, which is a kind of government-run thing. So Google Healthy Workplaces, and I'm not sure about your local area, but certainly in my local area, our local council, our local authority actually run the Healthy Workplaces initiative, and it's absolutely free for organisations to use. So you can contact your local authority if they're running healthy workplaces stuff. They run through an audit with your organisation and help the organisation to frame everything with workplace wellbeing being at its heart. Aside from that, there are 4 things which are key to workplace wellbeing. They are your psychological safety, that you feel okay and that you feel safe in your working environment, your physiological safety, your sense of community, and also your financial wellbeing. Those are the 4 key strands of workplace wellbeing, and I would suggest that any employer should be looking at those. Yes, it's great to get a consultant in or somebody like me to come and talk to you about it, but even if you can't do that, you can certainly start with the basics of, are there things that we can do here, even as a collective, as colleagues, that can try and hit some of those buttons.
Okay. Great. I wasn't even aware of that, so that's great advice. What else have we got here? So my problem is that after so many months of overload, I can barely see the wood for the trees. I feel totally overwhelmed and know my performance has suffered workload-wise. Any quick kind of tips from yourself to, obviously you've covered quite a lot of that today.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would do is to say that the overwhelm is completely natural and to be gentle with yourself about that. If you find yourself talking to yourself in a way that you wouldn't talk to a friend, then you're not being fair to yourself. So give yourself some credit for the things you are doing well. And I think a lot of people have really hit that overwhelm button, not during lockdown, but actually when the kids have gone back to school. That's when a lot of people have really suffered. Aside from that, I would write yourself a list. I'm a list person, so that's what works for me. If you can find another way, that's fine. Write a list of the things that you think you're not dealing with so well, and then look back through the tips that we've gone through today and say, can I apply any of that to my situation? And hopefully you'll find some things that will help you, even if it's just about boundaries, so that you get enough headspace outside your work time to relax, and that you're really using your downtime for you, because that's really important.
Okay. And I've got another question here. So any advice for a clerk that is a sole employee that has sadly a new cancer diagnosis and is undergoing treatment, but still trying to work between surgery and appointments, working alone, there was no one to hand off to, and was doing Zoom council meetings while signed off?
First of all, I'm so sorry for your situation, because it sounds A, scary, and B, isolating, and that must be really terrible. So even though you're working alone, I hope there is somebody there that you can talk to. And your employer, your employer's responsibility, really the key things they should be doing for everybody at this time is looking at 2 things. The first thing is communication, and the second thing is support. So ask whoever you have. I know it sounds like you have a very poor support network in terms of your working environment, but can your employer offer you something in terms of either support or communication that is going to help to ease that load for you? And if you can't get that at work, please try and find it through somebody in your personal life, or having a chat to maybe some local support groups, because the worst thing in all of this sounds like the isolation. And ultimately, if you walked away tomorrow, they would cope. So don't put yourself under too much pressure. All of us, if we walk away from our jobs, life would be difficult for other people, but they would cope and they would manage. You can't pour from an empty vessel, so you need to top yourself up and keep yourself as well as you possibly can, especially given your current circumstances.
Okay, perfect. I think we've probably got time for one more question. So I've been working from home this year, whilst also homeschooling kids, dogs. What would you say can help with trying to balance both roles? I found didn't feel like I was doing either very well, and it may happen again, which worries me, especially with the kind of impending COVID cases rising. Any kind of advice for that?
Yeah, I think first thing is, let's get rid of the myth of a work-life balance, because there is no balance. Balance suggests that scale is equally weighted, and it isn't. There are always times where I think for most of us, work takes up much more of our waking hours than home does. So don't there is no such thing as the perfect existence. And anybody who tells you they've got it all sussed, I'm working in the wellbeing industry. This is a biggie for me. Anybody who tells you they've got it all worked out is a liar, because we haven't. Nobody has. No, whether it's your job or not, you haven't. So as long as you're doing the best you can do, and as long as you aren't neglecting the things that with your own values you feel are really important, then I think we have to accept that we will feel that we are being both personally shortchanged, but also that we're shortchanging our children, our families, and also our work. If we do go back into another lockdown, the first thing is don't dwell on that. It's not happened. It's not in the present moment. It's a waste of your energy. So don't think about that. The second thing is if we do go into a lockdown, you've done it before and you'll do it better next time around.
Great advice. Well, Helen, I think that's all we've got time for. I think I could probably sit here all day and listen to you, but unfortunately we haven't. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been incredible. I know, yeah, from the chat comments, it's been amazing. So thanks again, Helen, and hopefully we'll see you again soon at future conferences. We'd love to have you back. So
thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed it, and good luck with the rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Helen. Take care. Bye-bye.